All right. We're back with another episode. Sean Johnson, good friend in Chicago. I appreciate you doing this, man. Thanks for joining us.
No, it's fun to be here. I've been following your journey, and it's been pretty impressive. And so,
Thank you, sir.
the fact that you think that this might be helpful for anybody is humbling. So I'm excited to do this with you.
I know it would be helpful. And I told you, by the way, off the record, I gave a compliment. Now it will be on the record. That I think a lot of people who probably follow you on LinkedIn, if you don't, trust me, this is one individual you definitely should. It seems like every post, whether it's on LinkedIn, the newsletter, anything you share,
Yeah.
always sort of resonates with me. It's always of value, and it's content that I'm like, man, I don't know how this guy creates these things, but I'm always in awe. So I admire your work a lot.
Well, that's very nice of you. I appreciate that.
Of
Yeah.
course, of course. Quick context for folks who don't know. So you've been in Chicago for quite some time. I met you in person. I want to say a couple months back. We had coffee in Soho House. The Sean Johnson I knew when I first moved here was the founding partner of Manifold, an early stage venture fund, innovation consulting firm. You also the version I knew was also the Sean Johnson who taught digital marketing at Northwestern Kellogg School.
Yeah.
So those were sort of the two categories. You then decided to create a Madison, which is sort of a firm. The way I understand it is it's a firm that partners with and helps professional services firm. Think of accounting firms, consulting firms, law firms. How do you take a playbook that brings modern marketing from your digital courses, from your days in VC, and help them amplify a brand that's relevant in today's world?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. That's a good, that was an accurate summary of the last
20 years, 15
yeah.
years.
No.
So that's where we are today. What I really wanted to, I have so much to dive into. I really want to focus on the Madison Playbook.
Sure.
Before we touch on that, I always love to talk about careers. You've had very non-traditional careers, unorthodox careers, very entrepreneurial, but in weird ways. Like you decide to do things that are not ordinary.
Yeah.
For you, was this all destined? Or was it sort of a spur of the moment you just kind of fell into?
Let's see. So I think it's probably a combination of things. So if I go all the way back, I graduated undergrad at University of Colorado. Unlike most of my friends, I had the bright idea to go and start my own company. And this was like tech startups weren't like a huge thing yet. So I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I started a web company, like a web design firm with one other partner. And our clients were like an ironworking shop and a mausoleum and a dentist and stuff like that. So it was like, in small town Colorado kind of thing. I shut it down. I made the decision on a whim. I had grown up in Colorado. I decided I needed to leave and just see, quote, the world, I guess. I went to Seattle. And I had intros to all of the major ad agencies. I've always been pretty good at like networking and finding mentors and maintaining relationships and that kind of thing. And I had a mentor who was on the board for the American Advertising Association, and he got me in the door with the principles of, not that Seattle had like an amazing ad ecosystem, but they had some big firms. Mm-hmm. And I went in there, and I was, I tried to go in very humble and like, I'll work in the mailroom, like I'll do anything. I just want to have an opportunity. And they were not hiring at that time. This was kind of like .com bubble stuff. And so I was a waiter at a seafood restaurant. And I met a girl in Vegas at a bachelor party. And she was at her sister's bachelorette party. She lived in New York. She was getting her master's at NYU. She worked at Ernst & Young. And I was a waiter at a seafood restaurant in Seattle.
It's a good start to the story.
Yeah. And I was like, well,
chapter one.
Work out. Yeah, exactly. So, but I'm charming and fun. And so we stayed in touch, and I ended up moving to New York about 3 months after we met, and got a needle in a haystack job on Craigslist as an account manager at what we would now call a tech startup. They were doing like marketing campaigns for universities basically at the time. And, but we had this idea to build what we would now call a social network. And it was all like in Flash. It was hilarious. It was like everything about it was so silly. But it was in a window. It was like, and now everybody understands ad models and things like that. We sold everything in like annual licenses, and so when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So that's how we did it. We sold them to the individual universities, but it was in like the yield window. So like if you get accepted to 3 different schools and they're all kind of the same, the idea was like if you make friends at one school before you get to campus, you're going to be more likely to go there, was kind of the premise. And it worked really well. We got bought by private equity. It was kind of a, like a little baby rocket ship in a way. I went from account manager to creative director in about 18 months, and it was super fun. So that one I think would very much be like serendipity, I would say. Like I met a girl in Vegas, and that's how that kind of changed the trajectory of my career in many ways. I think if I had not met her, I would be hopefully, a pretty talented person in an ad agency in Seattle right now. And so, yeah, so that kind of changed everything. But I would say like later in my career, so like and most kind of saliently to today's conversation, the decision to do Madison was part self-preservation, part like getting in touch with who I am. So I was starting to deal with, we had a Manifold we called it a venture holding company. I had a couple other partners. We were about 70 people when I left, but we had a 70-person innovation consulting firm, and then we had a venture fund that had 25 or so investments at the time. And as you know, like early stage venture, 70% of your investments are on fire for some reason or another. It's like, so just the anxiety was intense, and it eventually, and to my my partner's credit and other people who I know their credit, like they're able to handle that level of
Why was that anxiety provoking? Like what piece of
part of it? So you had everything associated with running the consulting business. So your team, and they want what they want, and the client, you have certain clients that are some more difficult than others, and so you're juggling all of that. On top of that, we had all of our venture stuff, and one of the initial premises, at least, of the fund in the beginning, was that we were going to be a very much a value-added firm, and it was like, we want to be the most legitimately helpful firm that you partner with as a startup. We evolved, I think, a little bit beyond that. It was a lot more surgical, kind of at the end. I think the some of the strongest founders that we had in our portfolio candidly didn't want our help, which is fine. Like that was something that we learned. But I think I emotionally bore their stress in a way. And so it's like you're carrying the stress of kind of trying to run your own business. You're also carrying the stress of all of these other ones in your portfolio. And again, for some people, they can do it. I feel like something kind of broke in me at one point, and I just was like, I can't keep doing this. And so, I think at the same time, like we were talking about what we wanted out of the next 10 years of our life, and my partners, I think, wanted to keep growing and more, bigger and better and more, and feeling the way that I felt, especially, I was like, I don't know if I have it in me to continue to do that, to go down that trajectory, and just to take on more complexity and more whatever. And I don't know if it's worth it for my soul. And so, so I made the decision to step away from the firm. I did not have a plan. I took about 18 months off. That was very hard, just kind of psychologically, like, who am I? It felt good to say that, like, you're a GP at a fund and like you were kind of a big deal and people wanted to meet with you. And now, I'm sort of super dad, and, I did this like coaching thing for a little bit, and really, really enjoyed it. I never felt comfortable calling myself a coach or anything like that, though. That always kind of bugged me. So anyway, I took 18 months off. Around 12 months into that, I started getting antsy. And this time around, I would say it was the opposite of serendipity. It was like, I want to learn from previous lessons. I want to ask myself, like, what do I really want? Get away from a lot of the noise. Because my initial answer to that would have been go start a startup or go do another fund or whatever. And so I actually developed kind of a practice of solitude. trying to like unplug, like no book, no phone, no laptop, no journal, like just first of all, just be comfortable being me. And it was,
Exist.
yeah, exactly. And way harder than it sounds, or maybe it is
Yeah.
as hard as it sounds. I don't know.
It is not. It
And
is,
it
sorry,
was,
as hard as it sounds. Yeah.
yeah, it was not an enjoyable experience, but I think a very formative one.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's what kind of got me to, I liked building the consulting business more than I liked doing the fund. Like the fund sounds cooler to a certain group of people, at least. And I think the ego part of me, the pride part of me, the pot of gold at the end of rainbow part of me, like resonated with that stuff. And there were parts of it I liked. I liked helping our founders. I liked sitting in pitch meetings and listening to cool ideas and, learning about the world. Was super fascinating and trying to be helpful. But I really, really liked the consulting business and the element of like service. I like consultants themselves. I think they're charming and winsome and well-read and, that kind of thing. And so kind of made a non-obvious decision to kind of lean into that. And so started exploring ideas around like, well, what would that look like? And so that was kind of how that process went.
There's a lot to unpack there. I resonate with a lot of the personal side of things, and I can imagine how difficult that is. I mean, I think if given that we live in, I think the third largest city in the U.S., a lot of our work is tied to the go go go. It's tied to the title, and it's tied to the value that you provide is also tied to your status.
Yeah.
Naturally speaking. And so I think that to realize that that's something that you're willing to give up in pursuit of something that is more aligned with what makes you personally more fulfilled.
Yeah.
It's hard because I don't even know how most people even get there, including myself. Like, is it questions? Is it soul searching? Did you travel for like a year and a half?
Yeah. So certain things that were helpful. So,
Sure.
like I said, kind of unplugging from all of the noise. Like, I don't think we fully appreciate that what we're swimming in on a day-to-day basis, and then the amount of information that we're kind of being bombarded with. I had a mentor a long time ago that said, you pick up ideas like lint, like you don't even fully realize it. And so like you have these presuppositions, or you have these framing stories, or these first principles, or whatever you want to call them. And we would like to think that we were very deliberate in the cultivation and organization of those. But in most cases, we got all of that stuff through osmosis. And it takes a tremendous amount of work to disconnect from that and to challenge some of those assumptions and to deconstruct it. And like the one I've talked about, I think I told you this, but one of the ones that was really dominant for me was the whole make a dent in the universe narrative. And I think I realized, and I might be wrong about this, but like I have a theory that make a dent in the universe kind of is an artifact of venture and of portfolio theory. And it's like, if I know that 80% or 90% of my investments are going to effectively go to zero, the ones that hit, it's a power law. So like the ones that hit have to really, really hit, and they have to make a dent in the universe as defined by some massive, massive outcome. And while there's nothing wrong with that, what I do think, I think it's a very limited narrative for most people. And so it's like the number of people who make a dent in the universe as defined by that narrative is very, very small. And, like the person who walks your dog, or who cleans your house, or the barista at your coffee shop, or, I went on my dad retired and got really involved with his church down in Texas and started going on these like medical trips down like to Honduras. And he invited me to go. I'd never done anything like that. And I was like, sure, I'll go. Like, it was staggering. And just, I just found myself thinking over and over again about like the water that I swim in my default state compared to these people who have never heard of, Sequoia, like whatever. And like, just whatever, like my narrative that was animating so much of things has nothing to say to those people. And so like the answer is either I'm right and everybody else is wrong, but I don't think that was true. So like I wanted something that was broader and more redeeming for more people. And so that was kind of the deconstruction part. The other part, as it related to kind of getting brass tacks about like my life, was the way I arrived at the consulting thing and the professional services thing was I started by asking myself, it's like the Statue of David thing of like, how did you make the Statue of David? And Michelangelo said, I started with a block of marble and I cut away everything that wasn't David. And it was sort of this idea of like subtraction first. And so I asked myself, like, what do I not want? And it led me down some surprising directions. Like I realized, like, at least for this season, I don't want business partners. I've always had business partners. There's a part of me that always wondered, like, what am I capable of and what am I not capable of? Like, there's a negotiation that has to happen kind of at all times around the vision of a thing. What your values are as an organization sort of becomes an amalgam of everybody's values, which, again, nothing necessarily wrong with it, but like I wanted to see what does it look like to build something in your quote unquote your own image in a way, and having a purity in that and not having to negotiate that, and what would that look like? And also see, like, what am I, if I fail, I don't have anybody to blame and it's just me. Like I'm either like,
Right.
So that was intriguing to me. So I wrote that down. I wrote down that I did not want investors because there's a certain sense in which, and as I saw, as soon as you raise money, it's no longer your company. Like I had control. We may have owned 10% of a business, but we had control provisions that allowed us to prevent you from doing certain things, and also committed you to a timetable that it was somewhat artificial. Like it's a function of like the money you raised and when I want to see a return on my investment. And I encourage you to spend it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of an artificial, the way I remember talking to my dad about it. And we were talking about like how starting a company is like jumping out of an airplane and trying to build the parachute before you hit the ground. And it was like raising money. It's like you have a jetpack attached to your back, but you're still pointed at the ground.
Like figure it out quickly.
So yeah, exactly. So that was interesting. And then like similarly, like debt, I wanted it to be a business that I could effectively like bootstrap, that had low CapEx. The anxiety thing, like peace was a meaningful piece of the puzzle for me in this new season of my life. So like I have ambition. I want to build a successful company, but not at the expense of my peace or the peace of my family. I don't want my kids, for the couple of years that they're still in my house, to see me frenzied and harried,
to absorb it
and distracted. Yeah, like I want to be, and I actually think I was relatively good at this in terms of being physically present. I made
mentally
for the family, but yeah, like I'd be sitting at dinner and I was somewhere else. And so like I wanted, I didn't want to be on anyone else's timetable, and I wanted to minimize the number of external pressures, I guess, was maybe a common theme. And so, and by disconnecting from like the make a dent in the universe thing, it's like, I feel like I get to meaningfully build into my clients' lives, and that could be transformative for them. And cultivating a team, I'm in the very, very early stages of kind of starting down that process, but like wanting to build into people and kind of grow my own like Bill Walsh coaching tree, so to speak, and prove that it is possible to kind of reconcile ambition and contentment, and to be able to like move through one's life at a cadence that is peaceful, and both for my sake and also like to prove that it can be done. Like I think I would love for, and I'm not there yet, I've got a long way to go, but like I would love to be at a place at some point where someone gets coffee with me or something like that, and they just have a sense that I have all of these things going on, but I'm deeply, deeply present in this conversation that we're having. And I don't have this, you don't get this sense that I'm running around like a psycho, and you don't get a sense that I am living in fear or any of those kinds of things. So, but yeah, I mean, it was 18 months of work to get to this. So
yeah, that's why I'm sort of digging into it. And I always love doing this on the podcast, because I think for a lot of the information that you do, and we're going to talk a bit about that, but what interests me more is sort of what people don't see behind the scenes that allows you to get to where you are, and the sort of surface level Sean Johnson that they see on LinkedIn once in a while.
Yeah.
Because I think that's healthy to talk about. I wanted to bring up something that has profoundly impacted me in the past 3 days. something that I've picked up. It's an object at the airport, which I pick up a lot of, and I don't always complete. And these are books. I picked up this book, dude, at the airport called The Midnight Library.
Mm.
You ever read this?
Mm-mm.
Dude, if there's one thing I would recommend, especially in this season of your life, given what we're talking about,
Yeah.
hands down the best investment you can make.
Cool.
$18, probably
Yeah.
marked up at, it's like 14 on Amazon. It was such a compelling story. Basically, the narrative, and this is why I want to share this to connect it to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Narrative is you have someone who's in England, could have been this like amazing Olympian swimmer because her parents really wanted her to be, could have been in a rock star band because her brother wanted it to be, wanted her to be that. Ends up her reality is this like, average life working at a guitar store in a village suburb an hour away from London, England. And to everybody on the outside, not married, doesn't have kids, on the outside it just looked like dismal failure.
Yeah.
And she tries to OD. I'm not going to ruin the whole thing, but tries to OD, then is caught between life and death, has this like visual of a library, never ending library, picks up a book. That book is the Book of Regrets, literally a massive book. It's sentences, line of regrets, everything that she regretted. The best part is she then has options, long window of books that she can choose different lives. These would have been different outcomes or possibilities had she decided to make different choices in her life.
Yeah.
The beauty, though, of this whole thing is it starts showing you that had she picked up, when she picks up the book of her as an Olympic swimmer, she quickly realizes that dream, when she's in it, she gets a bit of a taste.
Yeah.
She didn't realize that there were variables in that life that actually were pretty shitty.
Yeah.
Like she was constantly training and exhausted. She lived in like a dormitory room with a roommate who constantly was like high on drug, her father in that life was not present. He had passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And it all just goes to show that it's kind of the little parts of your life that you do have that actually can make a dent in the universe, to tie it back.
Yeah.
And it was the small things she wasn't realizing that she did have in her actual life, like the encounter with her elderly neighbor that she would pick up medicine for.
Yeah.
All the tiny things that she was doing that to her felt completely useless were actually making a dent in the universe. And so, anyways, long story.
Well, yeah. So one of the things I wrote down as my new sort of like KPI for life, I called it funeral-worthy relationships.
Mm.
And I had
That's
read
cool.
a story 15 years ago about some guy in Texas, like West Texas, who worked at a school, like a high school, and he passed away. And the author was invited to go give the eulogy. And so he was flying into town, and as it was getting closer and closer, he kept getting phone calls about how they had to move it into a slightly larger venue. And long story short, they ended up having to have this dude's funeral in a baseball field. And there were 2,000 people that came. And he wasn't like Kanye
famous
at all. Like nobody knew who, like you would never have heard of this guy. But there was something about the impact that he made in those people's lives that was material. And so I love the idea, because there is a certain absurdity to the idea of like legacy, as in like, like Thomas Edison, like that's the best I think one can hope for, is like to be Thomas Edison or Napoleon or whatever. And like what that practically means is that he's a paragraph in an encyclopedia that my kids don't want to read. And so it's just sort of like, or it's like a trivia, it's like an answer to a trivia question. You know what I mean? And so, but everybody, in terms of like a narrative that is redeeming, everybody can make a choice to, almost regardless of the job that you have, regardless of your station in life, how do I show up for the people that kind of are directly around me and build into them in such material ways that when I pass, like, and there's a certain morbidity to this, and I also won't know how good of a job I did until I'm, because I'll be dead. But I just like this idea, because I think it would change the way in which I show up for clients, for team members, for friends, for family, etc. You would pursue, kind of to your point around like doing these podcasts and kind of digging into the why, like you would pursue deeper conversation, you would pursue more meaningful connection, you would pursue trying your best to build into people, trying to find ways to help them kind of self-actualize, whatever you just want to call it. So yeah, that was a very, very helpful reframing for me. And I fail every day at this, but I'm trying at least to show up with that kind of in the background. Like, I love the idea of like, what would it be like if a bunch of my clients came? You know, like you tend to think about these relationships as being relatively transactional. I love like I showed my son Jerry Maguire for the first time, and you know, like the end where they hug or whatever, and the agent's like, "What? We have that kind of relationship." Like I love that idea. I want my clients to feel like I'm their Jerry Maguire, you know, their Jerry Maguire says.
Jerry Maguire.
Yeah, and like, you know, I'm a flawed person and I'm gonna mess up, and that won't happen for everybody, but like,
Sure.
kind of a neat thing to work toward.
Well, that's one differentiator too, is you talk a lot about this as well, which is what I wanted to dive into next. So thank you for the segue. For you, everybody talks about building meaningful relationships. It's easy to say that personally, right? But when you're also at a professional services firm, especially, that becomes sometimes hard for some people to do naturally, because there's always this, you know, looming light of, hey, Sean, love you, buddy, but I also know that you're working at this accounting firm and you're trying to build it. So how have you naturally been able to not only build meaningful relationships, but garner that trust in a way that actually is genuine to the person in front of you?
Yeah, I think the best one, and this only works if you start from the premise that the purpose of this is another. So, I grew up in kind of a faith tradition. I made
Likewise.
a document at one point that I haven't shared, but I've shared with a couple of people, but it was called A Theology of Work. And it was kind of challenging this idea that the primary purpose of a business is to maximize shareholder value. It wasn't always that way. And you can find writers like John Ruskin, like Louis Brandeis, who talk about business in a way that has a bit of nobility to it that I think we've lost. And it talked about like Ruskin talks about like the 5 major professions. And it was like the physician's job is to heal the society. The soldier's job is to protect it. There's a couple of like the teachers to teach it or whatever. And then the merchant's job is to provide for it. And so, and it said that profit is a necessary and appropriate like adjunct to this. Like you do a good job, you will have profit, but that is not the point any more than the point of the teacher teaching is to get their stipend. The point of the teacher is to educate the society or the group of people in which they kind of are accountable for, or responsible for. And so I love that idea of like, my job is to provide for my little society, my little kingdom. And there's a part of that that is like my kids and my parents or my family or whatever, but it's also bigger than that. Like, part of my job is to provide for my clients. And so, I have profit goals, I have revenue goals, but this is not a profit or revenue maximization exercise. And in fact, like, I think for the most part, my clients would say that I undercharge. And I do that deliberately. I do that for multiple reasons. One, I want to get as many, like, there's a practical part of that. If like, I want to load up,
of course,
and get as many
case studies, references.
Yeah, all that.
So and practice reps. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a practical part to that.
Sure.
But
as there should be. I mean,
yeah, but like there's a narrative out there about like value-based pricing and charge what you're worth and all of those kinds of things. And I think that there is a tension that potentially creates around, you're constantly having to ask yourself, are you getting what you paid for here? And one of my goals with this one, through good systems and good training and good coaching and mentoring and whatever, I want to build an organization that delivers incredible, like, great results for clients consistently every single time, such that they're just thrilled. Like, they can't believe how lucky they are that they get to work here with us. And part of that is like the ROI equation, and I want, my dad was a business consultant growing up, and like he used to say, like, I want the value that I generate to be 10 times what they're paying. Like, that's his litmus test. and it's hard to quantify and blah, 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 blah. But like, I want people to directionally feel like they're getting a bargain.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece of it, is that they know I'm not gouging them. I'm not, like, you know, like I am a bargain. The other piece of it is, and part of this, I think it's the best way to market professional services firms. I call it like give away your secrets. It is like, you are buying my brain. And so if my approach to marketing and my approach to sales is to hold everything close to my chest and share vague kind of garbage stuff, you're inferring from that like what my paid, if the stuff that you're seeing me put out in the world sucks, the stuff that you're going to hire me for is probably going to suck too. And so like, and then the reverse is true. If I give you my best stuff for free, like there's a version of that that's like, well, what is it like to work with this person? So I try to just add value with every interaction. And I think that's how I try to approach the stuff that you read, like on LinkedIn, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it was nice of you to say that. I don't like, you always wonder, like, is this helpful or not helpful or whatever? But that's the goal. Like, I'm not trying to go viral. I'm not trying to be an influencer. I'm trying to serve people. And so, and I hope that that comes through in those interactions.
Of course.
And the same thing is true in the buying window. So it's like, I will give you as much value as I possibly can during the sales process. Like, I've written document, like I don't do proposals. I have a 1.5-page engagement letter. Like, when you tell me you want to work with me, I have a 1.5-page engagement letter. It's very straightforward. But what I do have are like vision statements. So like, it's almost like I will write down how to grow blank firm. Like, this is a vision of what your company could be. And I try to tell you exactly in detail what I would do and how I think you should go about it. And you can take it and you can run with it and you can do it and you never have to hire me, and that's fine. And I've done that a bunch of times because I believe
before they're engaged, you're saying like before they're even a client, you're like, hey, before we get started, here's a glimpse of the work will come, like the details and the bullet points, all of that cool stuff will come, the boring stuff. But here's what I think it could be.
Well, and I'm using this, like, you know, I wrote a post yesterday about like being 5% strategic. Like, I think a lot of people try to have like they want to have corner offices and minions, and they want to think deep thoughts, and they don't want to do the hard work. And like, yeah, and the world is full of consultants like that. What I have perceived is, at least for boutique firms, like they need help in the trenches. And so like, I've sort of done this thing where I will do like positioning workshops. So like, if it's like a material kind of investment of time, I've done some of that kind of stuff, but I will give you my playbook of like how I would do this if I were your company, sort of generally, which a lot of people would consider to be like, quote, strategy work. Like, I'll give you that for free, because what I want is I know that ultimately you need help executing this. And so like, I want to earn the right to be your partner in the trenches, kind of showing up each day with my lunch pail and like doing the work.
I love that reference. Yeah. Partner in the trenches.
That's what I'm trying to do. And so I think all of those things, you put all those things together, and I think that people perceive that like, yeah, I'll hop on a call with you and riff on ideas, and I will sometimes write you an 8-page document of like, this is step by step how I would grow your company. And I'm not asking for, you know, I am saying like, if you think that anything in here will be helpful and you want to work with me, like, let's have that conversation. But I'm not, I am, the way I encapsulated everything was like, I want to get really clear on who I'm serving and how. I want to communicate that as frequently and as helpfully as I possibly can. And then I want to create respectful ways for people to raise their hand when they're ready. This isn't the only way to grow a company. Like, I think that it is 100% possible to do the very aggressive, like, lead gen, you know, et cetera, playbook. That's not my playbook. And that's not a playbook that I feel comfortable doing. Like, I want to respect you, and I want to respect your intelligence, and I want to respect your time. And I just sort of trust if I keep showing up, and I'm taking a long time horizon too. And again, this is like benefits of not having to negotiate with other partners and their goals, benefits of not having investors who have certain timetables, is like, I'm taking a 10-year, 20-year time horizon with this thing. And I'm like, if I just keep showing up for you and I keep adding value, either we will work together at some point, or somebody in your network will need what I have to offer, and I will be the first person you think of, and I will end up being just fine. And in the meantime, I get to just show up each day trying to be helpful for people, and sometimes I get paid for it, and sometimes I don't. And I think I can build a successful company that way. Can I build $1 billion company that way? Probably not, but that's not my goal. And so,
Is your playbook? I'm kind of curious personally, in fact, on this one, because I know one of the tenets that you believe in, which is also on the website, is you believe in 10-year increments. Like for you, compounding in general is super important, and in finance, for example, the key to compound is time. Like that's the exponent.
Yeah.
Why is that so crucial? Number one. Number two, can that sometimes not work against you, but say if you are believing in 10 years and say that you tend to move within different services firms, say within like 4 or 5 years, does that sometimes make it difficult to rebrand and get the narrative out again? Or can you use that as an exciting platform to reposition and repurpose the playbook?
I see. Okay. So when I say 10 years, the logic behind that, so when I stepped away from Manifold, there was a sense in which I looked back and I was like, I was really proud of what we built, because I was like, if you would have told me, we were a product development shop working with startups, and our first clients, I think we would build an entire like web and mobile application for like 25 grand when we started the company. And where we were able to get to, and like it was problematic, and I had a lot of anxiety and all those kinds of things. At the same time, though, like it was kind of shocking what I felt like we were able to build in a 10-year period of time. And there are people that are certainly better than me and build things faster and bigger and blah blah blah, but I was impressed with what we were able to do relative to what I thought I was doing when we started out. So I asked myself, like, well, what if that's how I started thinking about things? And I think when I was younger, I was obsessed with not just being successful, but being young and successful. And I think a lot of people are, and there are so many structures that kind of that feed into this. Like
Forbes 30 under 30.
When you're a public, like when you're a public company, you have quarterly, goals, and if you don't hit your quarterly goals, it's a problem. When you raise money from venture, you're now, like when you're in PE, if you get bought by PE, like they have a hold period and they have certain timeframes in which they would ideally like to, 3x you and sell you to the next person. Like, so there's a lot of structural elements that kind of push against this. But what I found for me at a personal level, it started as at a personal level, was like, if I set 10-year goals, I can simultaneously think bigger and be more patient. I don't have to race, and I don't have to be in a position where I'm hurried all the time. Like I can build a successful company that makes plenty of money for myself, pays my team well, delights our clients, and that's a successful outcome. And I can do that in a 10-year time period. And what it allows me to do is I don't have to, it makes it easier to not make decisions based on fear. It makes it easier to come from a place of like, I don't like the word abundance. It feels a little woo-woo to me, but like the idea of like the world's a big place, and like there are lots of people, when I think about like my total addressable market, right? Boutique professional services firms is probably
Massive.
But like, yeah, it's a huge, like there are more than enough people out there that I can, I don't have to be in a rush. And it means that I don't have to try to execute the 7 cold emails in 2 weeks with the quick question subject line and the, hey, you didn't reply to my first 3 emails for one of 3 reasons. And it allows me to respect your
boundaries,
your time, your intelligence. It allows me to build a company that's perception in the world, hopefully, is just completely driven by serving and adding value and respecting you and just trusting that like hopefully at least it doesn't reek of like any sort of desperation. Like I'm just showing up, each day trying to be helpful. And like this allows me to do that, and so and it's like when people, I've had calls with people where they're trying, they're like, hey, I have a goal to like have a certain pipeline in 90 days. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
I'm not
I don't
that
know.
person.
I don't know how to solve that problem for you. What I do know how to do is make sure that a year from now, that problem is a lot better because we got really clear on who we're trying to serve and how. And we made a commitment to be disciplined about just showing up and adding value for people on a regular basis. And I think that if you do that consistently, and it's very clear who you are and who you serve, like those people will raise their hand and your pipeline problem will be solved. It won't be solved in 30 days or 90 days, but I do believe if you fast forward a year, you'd be really surprised. And so
is that is a very important question I wanted to bring up. Is that something you often see as a friction point? Because you'll either for you as a firm or when you're talking to prospects or clients, there is always this sort of nagging battle between short-term metrics and results, like getting stuff through the door. Like it's cool, Sean. I'd love to see that in a year, but at the same time, I want you to execute in the next 30, 60. Like show me something in the door now so that I can believe in your narrative a year from now.
Yes. And again, I mean, I think it's helpful. Like the whole like 10-year thing is helpful for me in this regard is that like, I can walk away from business like that. Like I say it on the website, the way that people buy professional services is different than anything else. It is a trust-based sale. It is what they call a credence good. You are selling a completely intangible thing. You're selling an idea. You're selling the idea that like this smart person will come into your firm or your organization and will help you solve your thorniest problem that you've already tried to solve yourself and have been unable to do so. And that takes time. Like I think that requires, it's much more relationship based than maybe people give credit, than people assume. And I just think it takes time to kind of acquire that kind of trust. And so the goal is to make you like the quote unquote trusted advisor, which isn't my phrase. It's from David Meister. He's kind of the father of professional service firms, but it's like, and
what's
part
the
of
name?
that, David Meister, he wrote The Trusted
David
Advisor.
Meister.
Yeah. He's written a bunch of books about it, but that was his most famous one. But
check it out.
And that's one of his ideas is like taking a long-term view too. It's like, I will prioritize the needs of my client over my own. Is kind of one of the tenets of becoming a trusted advisor. And people can smell it if you are trying to be transactional. So like when I get on sales calls with people, there's a sense in which I'm not even selling. Like I'm just trying to help you solve your problem. And you know what I do. You already know what I do. So like we're on a call and you see it. Also, one of the beauties of what I'm doing, and you can't do this for every type of firm, but like it's sort of inception in a way. It's like I'm showing you by doing. So
exactly.
People get on a call with me and they're like, well, how do I know this works? And I say, well, why are we talking right now? You started following me on LinkedIn at some point. You kept seeing my stupid little face with my stupid little headline. Sometimes you click through and read more. Sometimes you don't, which is fine, but you keep seeing it. And eventually, like some of them you read, hopefully you find interesting. You're like, oh, that's a good idea. And like, I've made a little trust deposit in your brain. And over time, you come to hopefully think of me as somebody who has a little bit of wisdom and might be able to help you with your marketing problem. And then at some point you're like, I need to talk to Sean. And so like, that's how it works. And it's like, and then they're like, oh yeah, I get it. It's like, it is not direct response. It is not, I put one LinkedIn post out in the universe and I expect to get this back. It is fuzzy. It is long-term. It is much more like brand. And it requires, to your point, it requires a leap of faith on the part of clients.
My favorite part too, speaking of that interaction, at the end, because I share the same playbook, by the way, and I always have, and sometimes I'd get weird looks. Like sometimes I'll be proactive in saying, listen, this conversation is not even about X, which is what I'm serving, let's say, because it's not even important to you right now. We both know that. Like, it's too early for you to even pursue this path.
Yep.
Then we'll get to the end of the call, and I would have already made like 2 or 3 introductions on the call. Because sometimes I'll say, listen, I have a busy week ahead. Let me bookmark them now. Let's use our time productively. I'll make these introductions now.
Yeah.
We'll get to the end of the call and they'll be like, that was amazing. What can I do for you? My favorite thing to say, I just want to see you succeed.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll help down the line. If so, I'll give you a ring. For now, just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't really believe that. Like, what do you want from me?
Yeah.
I'm like, nothing. I don't. Yeah.
Well, it is a different way of moving through the world. And
Sure.
It is not a narrative that you get told a lot. And it's the kind of thing that you have to sort of do and just see how it makes you feel. And then you realize this is a better way of living. Like, so for example, like I was on a call a couple weeks ago, a firm that does it's like a podcast production firm, and they're really, really struggling. And they're trying to kind of turn around. To your point, they don't have the budget to hire me. They're not a client right now. I think what maybe former me would have probably done, and I think what a lot of people would do, is be like, well, that person they're not an ideal client right now, so they're kind of not worth my time. What I chose to do was give them as much advice as I could on the call, get off of the phone, spend a couple hours on the weekend looking at their sites and looking at other things. And then I wrote her a big, long write-up of like, this is what I would do if I were you. And just, I hope it's helpful. And like, take what's helpful, leave off what's not helpful. But, like, just, I'm rooting for you, and I hope that this works out, and keep me posted on how it goes, and I didn't do it. I'm not expecting them to ever become a client. I want them, to your point, I want them to be successful. I want them to be able to turn that ship around.
Right.
And maybe at some point, some other firm will talk to her and she'll be like, oh, you should talk to Sean. Like, that would be success in my mind. And that would be amazing.
I did want to just end quickly on ICP. I know you also talk a lot about this. I was really curious just to get your thoughts for those listening. I believe what you referred to it as is ideal client persona, let's say, or profile, however you want to think of it.
Yeah.
Do you have a system as to how to actually visualize or draw? The reason I'm asking, I've heard people in the past reference names, like my ICP is like Dora.
Yeah.
And at the firm, this is who Dora looks like, with attributes, meaning, characteristics that helps the entire firm align on what it is we want to focus on. But how do you actually draw that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a template that I will use, and it includes things like demographic stuff. I don't do the persona thing per se. Like, I don't give them a name. Part of that is because a lot of professional services firms are selling into groups of people, not individuals. And so, it's more around what are the characteristics of the firm, and then who are some of the key decision makers kind of within that firm, and like, what are their hopes and fears and like pain points and goals and that kind of thing. So that's like at the tactical level, how I do it. I think some of the things that, like, just at a high level, I think a lot of professional service firms are unwilling to focus, and they do themselves a disservice by doing that. Like, and I even saw this like when I was doing like the innovation consulting thing. It was like, I can't tell you how many conversations I was in where they didn't know how to buy from me. And it was because I wasn't willing to kind of put a stake in the ground and say, like, this is who I serve, and this is specifically how I serve them. It was most like, I think if I were to summarize how I used to position myself or like my previous firm, and this is all my fault, but it was like, we're a bunch of smart people that do stuff. And they're like, well, what kind of stuff? And we're like, well, what do you want? Which isn't a great way to sell a business or to sell services. So, and I remember, like, once we passed, I don't remember, it was probably like around 10 million or so in revenue. Like, we started getting hit up by these investment bankers, and their initial conversation was like, oh, you're now in like the sweet spot for a potential acquisition or whatever it was. And that was never really our ambition anyway, but I would take those calls because I just was curious about that world. But once they got on the phone with me, like one of the most commonly repeated pieces of advice was like, you would grow a lot faster if you would like pick a lane and like focus. And it could be healthcare, it could be a technology, it could be, kind of whatever. And I were just unwilling to do that. And so this time around, I tried very deliberately. I made a conscious decision. Like I am a marketing firm for professional services firms. And I get asked, like, do you help, like, because my previous world was with founders, for example, there's the idea of like the founder-led sale. Do you help do you help founders too? Like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm trying as hard as I can to stay focused and to learn my previous lesson. So I think that's like the main point is like pick a lane. And I think the other sub point on that, and this depends on the scope of what you're trying to do. Most of my clients, I would say, I think almost everybody is actually, that might not be true, but I think everybody is sub 50 million. So I don't know how much of my playbook is relevant for trying to build a $1 billion company, but I know like many, many firms would love to hit 10 million or 20 million or whatever. And I know that it works for that. And for that type of person in particular, they're very scared of like picking the lane and like, which one should I do? And I kind of approach that a little bit differently. I say, who do you like working with? Because I believe, again, like getting back to that idea around sort of an abundance kind of mentality, the world is a big place. And I think that you can almost pick any industry for the most part, and it will be a big enough industry for you to, have
operate within.
Have 10 or 20 clients a year. Like that's success for a lot of these people. And so there's a sense of which is like, what industries, what kinds of people, what technology stacks do you really like? Like dev firms run into this a lot, and it's like, where do we play? And it's sort of like, pick something. Like what kinds of work do you like doing? Wearable devices? Do you like doing IoT stuff? Do you like, a lot of people are trying to do the AI thing, so there's a lot of noise there. But like, is there a certain platform that you really like? I was talking to a firm that just does Flutter development, and like they're the Flutter people and they're crushing it. And like, and there's a certain arbitrary, like they got a little bit lucky and it turned out to be this rising tide. But I like start with what you want your life to look like. Start with what you want like your firm to look like, and how do you want to show up each day or each week or whatever, and make decisions based on that. Like if there's a larger industry, if you're trying to decide between industry A and industry B, or persona A and persona B. Persona B is a lot bigger, but they're assholes or whatever. You just don't like working with them. It's boring. It's mundane or whatever the criteria is. But you like this one better. I would say do this one because you're
Just give it a try.
Yeah, like you will be fine if you go all in on it. And I've seen it like compared to. I used to get hit up all the time about wanting to be invested in the fund, but it was my inbound deal flow when I was sort of generic enterprise innovation was a fraction of what it's been just in the 8 months now since I started doing this. And I think it's literally just specificity. It is everybody. It's my LinkedIn headline. I grow professional services firms. 80%, let's say, of the content I'm writing is tailored to professional services firms and how to add value for them. And it just makes it easy to understand. And when they're ready, they raise their hands versus just, I serve everybody and I do all kinds of stuff. Like that's hard to buy. So I think that's probably the bigger piece of it. And then it's like tactically, yes, like once I've made that decision, let's go down and let's create that ideal client profile and let's get really specific about what those things look like. But a lot of people, I think, skip that part of like, it's really hard to write an ideal client profile when it's like enterprise companies. It's like, which one?
What size?
Yeah. I don't know.
That's amazing, dude. So pick your lane, stay focused, think long-term, 10-year horizons if possible. Think of trust every day, but also understand that trust can be scaled and it compounds over time. Be consistent, and check out Sean's profile. I will say, dude, for some reason in this podcast, I didn't have I usually have a journal with me or some notepad, and I didn't. And I just want to show you what's on my table before we wrap up. Hold up. Yeah, like 30 sticky notes. Thank you, dude. This was I'm not surprised. I knew this is how it was going to go. Can't thank you enough.
No, man,
Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm cheerleading you, man.